we're all in a place right now where technology changes so quick that
Super quick.
we have to be constantly in this place of learning. Otherwise, we're just going to get run over. I
You
mean,
know, yeah,
yeah, you're
without
going
question.
back to the Cinefex days, right? Where it's like,
Yeah,
everybody talks about this amazing thing that they're doing technology wise, and
right.
then you talk to the people working in the studios, and they're like, yeah, we're just pulling birds.
Doer. Yeah.
When Ralph 2 came along, we had to populate all of the internet, right? And so we were pulling characters from every film. And of course, one of those films that we needed to pull characters from was Ralph 1. And so anything past there, like we grabbed characters from Frozen, Moana, Zootopia, like you name it. And they all transferred pretty well because they were all standardized.
Welcome to the show, you guys. Today I have with me David Komorowski. He's a longtime friend of mine. I met David in 2000 when we first kind of got into the industry working at Fathom Studios, and that's probably a tale for another time. But um, David has worked at Disney Feature Animation. He's been a CG supervisor for a long time on Wreck-It Ralph, Zootopia. Um, is it Wreck-It Ralph 2, right?
Yep. Yep.
Ralph Breaks the Internet, and you've done lots of other work there too. Am I missing anything at Disney or
Plenty of things over at Disney. I had
lots
it,
of stuff?
almost a 20-year career there. So like
It's
I've
insane.
worked on all kinds of films. I've, worked on park rides. I've done, CG souping over there. I was a studio lead over there. So yeah, there's plenty, but yeah, I think you hit the highlight.
And probably half that stuff like will never see the light of day. There's a lot of like little projects we worked on, even at the very beginning, that never like American Dog. Remember that? Or
Yeah, American Dog. Like so many films I worked on that have just never made it out, right? Like that have
yeah,
just, they got shut down. American Dog turned into Bolt. I think there's one of the interesting little facts there is the only because we made all the assets for American Dog. We were ready to go on that thing. Like
that's
we had
insane,
characters,
man.
yeah, we had the look a picture and everything, and then it got shut down. And Bolt started, and the only asset to make it all the way through was the little carrot that Bolt as a baby is chewing on in the opening sequence. That's all that made it through. Everything else was kind of tossed. Yeah,
Yeah, what was the director's name? Was Chris the
Chris
original?
Sanders.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
from
yeah,
Lilo and
Chris
Stitch.
Sanders,
And
amazing artist. But
I
he had
love those character designs, man. Like the
so good. He's so good. Yeah, he did Lilo and Stitch. He went. I think he went on to DreamWorks after that, and he did How to Save Your Drag or How to Train Your Dragon and The Croods. You can tell How to Train Your Dragon, right? Like it's
yeah, like the
Stitch with wings.
proportions. Yeah,
It's pretty
totally,
much.
man. That was
Yep.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nuts. I think there's a lot of people that were at Disney. I think especially during those pre-Pixar years that probably worked for like 10 years on different projects and aren't able to show anything on their reel from it because
I
it's
know.
all like stuff. What was that one that Hiroki was working on? I think before I got there, maybe that was like a realistic version of like Harrison Ford, and they were doing like
Yeah.
this crazy like fax face. I forgot what the name of the movie was, but
Gemini Man.
Gemini Man. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was like a photo real Harrison, like young Harrison Ford, and this is back in like 2003 or
Yeah.
2002 or something like way before all the cool Weta facial stuff came
Yeah.
on board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that was like that was innovative before there was an industry for that stuff, right? Like you're talking the time where we were as an industry just trying to figure out how do we even make CG movies, right? And they're way in the forefront, right? Like pushing that technology to the nth degree. Like I mean, yeah, you're in those days like we didn't have any standards, we didn't have anything, right? Like it was just like okay, we need to make these things, let's just do it. And and you just get a bunch of people together and just start creating stuff. But like now after many years that stuff's been optimized. There's workflows, there's standards, there's all kinds of things, but yeah, back then that's wild west.
Yeah, I
Yep.
remember Ryan was showing us like the rig. What was the rigging system that he had built? Do you remember the name of it? It was
I
like
don't remember the name of it. Yeah,
it
but
was super early on, and it was he was like, yeah, you could orient the joints and you could do all these different things. And we're like, oh yeah, it's badass.
yep, yep.
And
That was the first time. I think back then, like you're talking early 2000s, and he had like bendy arms and things like that,
yeah,
right? Because he was using NURBS planes with joints attached to it to actually bend the arms into different shapes and
which
whatnot.
still works great.
Yeah. That was and again, another one of those things that was ahead of its time, right?
Yeah, I think I remember seeing like the early Scrat stuff. Remember like seeing
Yeah,
like the first Ice Age and seeing all the stretchy arms and all like the crazy,
I know. The
cartoony
stuff's
stuff
gotten
and just
so good now. It's just nowadays we kind of take that for granted. All of that
yeah, you
stuff.
don't think too much about it. But
Yeah,
at the same time, it seems like a lot of smaller studios have to kind of reinvent the wheel with those things. Like I've worked at a couple smaller places and like they all want like, can you write a rigging system or things like that? And there you are writing like a stretchy, bendy IKFK
yeah,
arm for the
yeah,
billionth time and
yeah. I mean,
different.
there's plenty of auto riggers to download too and whatnot, right?
Mhm.
Like there's so many things out there nowadays that helps people out, But yeah, I think the key to that, the key for us at Disney was standardization, right? Because we would have everybody did things a little bit differently, right? Rigs were a little bit different depending on the artist you gave it to, and the animators' preferences were a little bit different. So like if you had one character that you were animating, and then you had to jump onto another character, you might have to relearn that character, right? Because
Oh
it had
yeah.
a different rigging system. So I think with standardizing all of that stuff, we worked a long time with animation over there and really kind of worked with them to get what is the core functionality that they all want and get them to come in agreement with it. And once we are able to do that, then you start standardizing things. Then you can proceduralize things, right? You can kind of have your builds be just completely script based, and then the next step from there is to automate a lot of characters, right? And then you have crowd systems, right? And they all act as one, right? The A character, back in the day, it used to be the A character had all the bells and whistles, and then your C characters were like, maybe their legs didn't bend, or you know what I mean? Like you didn't put the time in it because they weren't going to see the screen, right? Like they were just going to be in a bit part. But nowadays, with all the standardization, like your C characters can be at the same level as your A characters, and so it's kind of a standing joke where, like, with all of this automation and everything, we make the processes quicker, we make everything more robust, and just all the bells and whistles. You would think that the movies would be easier to do, but they still take the same time, right? Like, where it shows up is in the quality of the film and the scope of the film, right? Because like in movies like Bolt, I think Bolt had, if I remember correctly, somewhere around 50 characters in the entire movie. And then
Right.
you fast forward to something like Wreck-It Ralph, Ralph Breaks the Internet, and there's literally millions of background characters for you to pick from, right?
And they're
Because
all different. They're not all like just human bipedal
yeah,
or whatever. They're
yeah,
crazy video game characters. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's pretty nuts. It's pretty nuts. So, it's the quality is what ends up being where you spend your time, which I think, to me as an artist, I kind of like that, right? Like, why do I want to recreate an IKFK switch on every single character when I can take that same time and focus it on the art of the character, right? Make it more appealing, right? And so that's kind of where that time shifts to. So now it's upping the quality of those characters.
So what was it like going from Tangled to that was right before Wreck-It Ralph, right? And that
Yep.
was so then and I know I seem to remember hearing that like things were a bit different, and then going into Wreck-It Ralph, you had like a new, I think a D. Does that when D-Rig really first kind of came on board, or?
D-Rig was being written on Wreck-It Ralph. So we had entangled everything, everything. We had a rigging system, but in the early days over at Disney, this is part of that no standards thing that I was saying,
Right.
right? Every film had a new rigging lead and had a new animation lead, right? And they were going to be the ones that were going to crack this thing. Like they were, and so every film you had a brand new rigging system. They would write, a brand
From
new one,
scratch?
yeah, from scratch. Like that would be the beginning of the film. It was D-Rig that actually started to stabilize that a little bit. On Ralph, we started writing it, and it was implemented to a lesser extent there, but it really got taken advantage of on Frozen, which was the next film.
Right.
Ralph had so many one-off characters, right? There was space bugs, there was bipeds, there was even a devil dog character in there, right? Like with four legs, like it was literally a devil dog, the treat, with four legs, and so everything was just a one-off, right? And so we didn't have a lot of standardization on there. The funny thing is when Ralph 2 came along, we had to populate all of the internet, right? And so we were pulling characters from every film. And of course, one of those films that we needed to pull characters from was Ralph 1. And so anything past there, like we grabbed characters from Frozen, Moana, Zootopia, like you name it. And they all transferred pretty well because they were all standardized. So if I knew what the standards were for this movie and what the standards were there, I could make a script to, bridge the gap between those two and upgrade them.
Right.
However, in Ralph 1, there weren't standards, so all of the transfer ended up being a manual task, right? Like it was because since they weren't standardized among each other, it was hard to write a script to convert them all, right? And so it was actually much more difficult. So standardization is, I keep talking about that like it's a great thing, but like that's one of the things that it helps you with too, right? Like if you've got historical assets, it makes them easier to pull online because if you know the one thing that breaks, I can fix that one thing across all characters. Okay?
That sounds crazy. Yeah. So I imagine when they came to you with Wreck-It Ralph, like, all right, we have a 100 characters. They're all 100% different for the most part, and we need to have them. Did they come to you and say we need to have them done within 6 months or something like that, or did they say how long will it take to get these done?
I mean, typically the way it works out is, I'd like to say it's a negotiation. Sometimes it's not.
Right.
Sometimes it's just do it. But I think typically the way it works out is, we will watch the story reels. We'll watch a first screening of a film, and then me and my production supervisor will sit in a room and we'll start writing down all of the characters that we see, right, and what they need to do, and look at them in matter of importance, right? Are they an A, B, C character? And then we'll start bidding those things out. So we'll go through and it's gonna there's an A character. It's gonna take X amount of weeks in rigging, look, modeling, blah blah blah, and all the way down to the C character, and that's where we get our budget, right? Now, after that, there's a bit of a negotiation period, right? Because like originally, like nothing's rocket science, right? Like it's a guess, it's a bid, it's an estimate.
Totally.
Yeah. So you kind of present that to the producer. The producer will push back a little bit. You'll look for, are there savings in here? Can I reuse anything, right? And so you'll go through that, and then you'll come up with the bid, right? They'll typically say like, oh, it's great, but we're like 10% over. We need to knock it down 10%. And so we'll go through that process, and then if there's anything that falls out of scope, right, something that's just massive and it's like it's very expensive for one shot, that's typically where I'll have to try and present something to the director as an alternate. When dealing with directors, uh, you don't want to tell them no. You don't want to
Uh,
be the guy that's like, this is too much, because it's really, at the end of the day, it's not my money, right? It's Disney's money. So what you want to do is you want to hit something that will achieve a story point, right? Because the director doesn't know the technicalities of what you're running into. They don't understand the complexities, right? They see the world through story. And so if you can put out a compromise there that still hits the story point and it's economically feasible, typically they'll go for it, right? And they'll be great, and the audience never sees what was planned. They only see what was done, right? And
right.
so that's really all that matters. As long as it works for the story, really, that's all that matters. Uh, you know, not all the time do I win those arguments,
Uh,
but a lot of times I think it's good practice. I always tell people to try and think of your audience when you're getting into these negotiations, right? Like, directors see things in through the lens of story. Animators see things through the lens of performance, right? Like, you gotta kind of put yourself into their shoes, because if you come at them from a technical bent, it's just gonna be, you're kind of get nowhere, right? Like, you're just,
yeah,
they don't get it, and it's not their job to. It's your job to, and you have to be the translator.
yeah, that's crazy because as a rigger, I know you come from a modeling rigging background,
Mm-hmm.
so when you look at something, I imagine you're like, oh, I see like this technical hurdle. I see, oh, that's gonna. We have no idea how to do that. How's this? Do you when you're going through those story reels, do you pick those things out as well and say, okay, how are we going to solve this character's
Yeah.
deformation or whatever it might be that's like jumping out at you is like, hey, we don't know how to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of this stuff, that's exactly where the negotiations come in, right? And you also have to weigh out, like, I'm thinking of there was one shot in Wreck-It Ralph 2 where they wanted to pay an homage. All the princesses were in there, right? And they wanted to pay an homage to Ariel in the one scene where she's up on the rock and she flips her hair back. It's a beautiful shot. Glenn Keane did. Um, and they wanted that in Wreck-It Ralph 2 to kind of harken to that moment, right? And so um, that was an incredibly complicated thing to do for hair, but we're not going to break the bank and make a hair rig that can do all of that stuff, right?
Right.
Things like that would often get done. Okay, we're going to do that in shot. We're just going to give it a little bit extra room to breathe in shot departments, right? Somebody is going to manually go through and wrangle that thing into place, right? And they did, and the team is amazing over there. It's just really high quality artists, and the tools over at Disney, they've been building them for a really long time. Like, you've got some pretty incredible tools to be able to deal with things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of tools, I seem to remember, didn't Python for Maya, wasn't that developed at Disney by what's his name, Andy or somebody? I forgot. It was back early 2000s. I remember seeing like little meetings about that. Do you remember
I'm
anything about that?
I'm not even sure about that. No, I don't know
Yeah.
the piece. But yeah, I think originally, wasn't it? I think originally Python was done by an ILM guy, right? Um, the original Python,
Oh,
but
for actual Python
yeah,
itself? Oh yeah, I'm not sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know the
Yeah.
answer to that one. Uh, Not sure.
Oh yeah, speaking of ILM, so then, you know, when ILM, so how, did it, what was the, when Disney, so Disney bought Lucasfilm, right?
Yep.
And then they pretty much acquired ILM and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Then did you like get to like get your hands on any of that, the tech or any of the tools
Oh,
that they were using?
yeah. We'd meet with. That's the great thing about it, right? Not just ILM, but Pixar as well, right? Uh, we would meet with them where you you wouldn't take the tech outright, right? Because they're all integrated into their own systems, right? And we have
Right.
our own system. But what you would do is you would share a lot of thoughts, and you could share the code underneath that tech. And so we would do a lot of that, right? A lot of the interpolation methods that we were looking into for PSD was ideas that ILM had in their systems, right?
That's
And so
crazy.
we've also worked with Pixar on a lot of their tools. There was on Ratatouille. I remember when I first saw Ratatouille, I I didn't know what it was about that film, but something felt very tactile about the humans, and I was like, wow, they feel really good and they feel really fleshy, and I don't know what it is. And so we chatted with the Pixar guys, and they had written a kind of a fake volume preserving deformer, which would basically, as you pressed into something, it would deform the surface and it would push out a volume
Oh, cool.
you were touching it. And so we're like, oh, that's amazing. And so when Luigi, was it Luigi? I forget the character's name. Had I can't remember the rat's name. Oh my god, I just got a blank.
Don't
Uh,
ask me, man.
Remy, right? It was Remy. But
Sounds right.
he had him in a jar, and like you saw his fingers squishing against that glass, and it was a subtle little thing, but it just felt so good, right? And so we would take some of that stuff and we'd incorporate it into our system, and I think we'd also have we started a thing that we called Disgraph, which was the meeting of like once a year. We have a meeting. The different or companies would sponsor it each year, but we'd have a meeting of all the studios and talk about different topics that we wanted to talk about at the time, like things that we were doing, different tools we were writing, different innovations and whatnot. So it was a really great way to collaborate, right? We were completely separate because we all use different pipelines.
Right.
ILM has Zeno, Pixar has Presto. We were using a Maya-based pipeline over at Disney. So it was, everybody had their own pipeline, but you could still share a lot of the ideas and a lot of the code underneath, which is pretty
That's
cool.
pretty badass.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I first started after so David and I first started at the Florida Disney studio back in like 2003, right? And
Yeah. That's
then quickly when that shut down, we both went over to the Burbank studio. And I remember after getting there and being like, oh, like the muscle system they used on dinosaurs here, and like looking around in the, under the hood trying to find that stuff, and talking to some of the guys that worked on that at the time, and just like thinking that was like the holy grail to like play with or check out. But it was kind of, and then you kind of find out it was kind of like a hacky,
yeah.
skin
Yeah.
system,
I
you
mean,
know, yeah,
yeah.
with
You're
lots
going
of,
back to the Cinefex days, right? Where it's like,
yeah,
everybody talks about this amazing thing that they're doing technology wise, and then you
right.
then you talk to the people working in the studios, and they're like, yeah, we're just pulling verts, man.
Doer, yeah. We spent
Yeah,
12 hours on a 5 second shot, like shot sculpting this thing.
yeah. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of that. But I mean, it's promotion. It's it is what it
Yeah,
is. Uh,
yeah. I recently kind of nerded out over the muscle system in Houdini.
mhm.
So after Aziva got kind of shut down or bought up by, I forgot what's DNEG or whatever, I was like, well, what are people going to use? So I got, I always wanted to learn Houdini, so I downloaded Houdini and started messing around with the muscle system in there. And it's really unwieldy, man. It's really hard to get
Yeah,
like specific results, like art directable results, and something that's predictable. Um, I'm sure, I guess if you work with it enough, you probably get a really good feel for it. But it's really tough, even today, with like I would say like the latest stuff with
yeah,
a muscle system to get,
yeah. I
you know,
mean, yeah, and it's I mean, especially like when you're dealing with animation, where a character can rotate 180 degrees in one frame, right? Like the skin
Right.
would literally
It's
fly
like
off of
physics. Yeah.
the yeah. So yeah, it's I think I'd love to have that simulate button that just like makes a perfect simulation every single time, but like I think a lot of people think that that's what happens, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of like there's entire teams that are running simulations and cleaning up the results of the simulations. They're
Yeah.
cache blending, like oh, this part of the shot works and the rest of it doesn't, so they try different settings on the and then they'll blend between the two
Oh,
caches.
yeah.
You know, it's their muscle systems. Maybe they're great for mocap because mocap has limited range, right? Like it has actual real movement. But for animation, it's really, really difficult. Like I, I remember there was this one shot on Wreck-It Ralph where we were just running the sim on his shirt. But he was tucked into a little cart that was too small for him. And so, it was the joke in the film because he was supposed to be oversized for this thing. It was supposed to carry small people, and he's stuck in there. And so, the simulation starts. He's in T pose. The simulation, the arms go down, then they go into itself. And when the results came back, our simulator is pretty good over at Disney. It will try and figure something out, before it completely fails. But in this case, it was like his head went through the t-shirt sleeve, right? His arm was through the bottom of the shirt, so it completely rotated the shirt. It's just it's the nature of what it is, right?
Yeah.
It's the simulation is like that, but yeah,
Tech
muscle.
Anim.
What's that?
Tech Anim.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, no, they I mean they're amazing. Hair is another one, right? Where it's that's come a long way. I think on Rapunzel, actually we started it. Actually, believe it or not, on American Dog. Back then, I was actually the hair lead on that show, and so we were investigating Maya's hair at that time, and there was it was giving us decent results, but like there was a lot of things that we needed to be able to add on to it, right? Disney always customizes their stuff, and we need to be very robust to be able to do
Hmm.
1,400 shots in a film. So we were working with Autodesk, going back and forth trying to get just ways we could get into the system so we can modify it. And I think just just because there was so much of that stuff needed for us that was the point when we decided to write our own hair system. We were like, it's the Maya system's really good, but we need all of this extra ability. And so it was on American Dog when we started writing that ended up going into Rapunzel, which was a real stress test, right? It's there's 75 feet of hair. It's you're going to definitely beat up the system. But now if you fast forward to today, like Moana, her hair's blowing through. It's curly hair, which is itself a challenge,
Right.
but it's blowing in the wind nonstop, right? And it looks so natural. Those tools just evolve over time. Not just the simulation tools, but also how we interact with it, right? We had shots in. I remember one shot in particular in Ralph Breaks the Internet where Vanellope goes into the princess's room, and in there's Ariel's over there, and she's combing her hair with a fork, but she's grabbing it and combing it. You have Pocahontas. I think she was combing. I'm trying to remember whose hair, but I remember her combing somebody's hair like at the same time she's grabbing it and combing it. We had Rapunzel in there, right? Like it, and this was just basically, a quick little shot, an establishing shot, just to show them. But there was so much complexity, and without growing those tools, that would have been impossible for us. But like, we have a lot of tools to be able to manipulate the hair as well. Not just run the simulation, right? Because if you got to, I mean, from a rigging point of view, how hard it is to actually grab like a rope
Yeah.
or hair, something that's sliding as it's going, right? Where your anchor points are always different. That's a very difficult task, but that's exactly the challenge that we had, right?
Yeah, that's crazy. Is that where XGen came from, basically?
Yeah, XGen. I don't know when it first, because it was before my time, but I know it was used on, what was that dragon movie? Rain of Fire.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was used on Rain of Fire for the dragon scales. They actually used XGen on there, and that was like one of the first iterations of it. I don't know if it predates that movie, but I know it was used at that point in time, and it's just evolved. It's evolved since, right?
Yeah, that movie, man. Yeah, that was one of the cool ones that I remember. Like, I haven't watched it in a while, but I would imagine it still holds up pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, tanks and dragons, man.
Yeah.
How can you go wrong?
I do remember being a little disappointed that there was only like one battle with the tanks and the dragons, but
Yeah,
I guess you
yeah.
only
No,
do so much.
I remember feeling the same way. I hadn't seen it in a long time either, but I remember
Yeah,
feeling the same way where it was like, man, I wanted to see more dragons. Like I wanted to see more destruction, more. Yeah,
yeah.
but
But then
still
Game of
great.
Thrones, right? Like that's what that was.
Yeah, hundred
They did
percent.
not disappoint.
For sure, for sure. Yeah,
So when you were on these projects, and one of the things that I have trouble with sometimes is just dealing with all the different personalities that you have on a team, and like being a CG soup or a studio lead, like you're dealing with some really smart people, some really opinionated people,
yeah.
and just all the different personalities and trying to make a whole production work. Like how much of your job was trying to just navigate how to deal with that?
It's funny. I would joke that 90% of my job is just dealing with personalities, right? Like just, just focus, 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 right? But
Yeah,
I think a lot of that goes down to like, you know, management style and how you work with people. I think to me, I've always, I come from modeling and rigging, but I never showed a bias towards modeling and rigging. I tried to stay up here and just kind of like, hear everybody out and hear what the best solutions were, right? Because you don't want to be thought of as unfair or, because that's where people start getting kind of pissy and whatnot, right?
yeah,
But I think,
resentful.
yeah, if you're fair, people and people understand the logic of your thinking, people generally, even if they don't get their way, they accept it, right? And there's a lot of great ideas out there that people have, but not everything can be done. You have a limited amount of time to make this film, and it might be a fantastic idea that you have, but it just won't fit within the scope of the film. So I think transparency is a big key to that, letting people know why. Just don't say no to people, right? Like
Yeah,
nothing pisses anybody off more than just no, right? Like
because I
everybody,
said so.
yeah.
Point your finger. There's the door.
But yeah, no, there's a lot to that. I mean, I think that in itself is kind of an art form, right? Just how
Oh
you manage
yeah,
people. I joke that the CG industry, it's egos and introverts, right? Like that's what it's made up of, right? Like the whole place, and so it's just knowing how to manage that, and I guess people skills, I guess is really what it boils down to. But
yeah. It's crazy because sometimes people get super stressed about like discussing a naming convention or like getting like they'd go home and like lose sleep at night because like they're not going to use the naming conventions they're using are so stupid and like it's going to break the pipeline. We need to do, it's like,
yeah,
dude, we're making movies, like we're making animated films, man.
I know. People tend to get myopic on things, right? Like they
Yeah.
tend to just focus in on like this is at the end of the day, like none of that matters. If the movie is crap, none of your naming conventions matter. None of it, right? Like, and so I think it's just trying to, I don't know, look at where it falls into the scope of things, right? Like
Yeah.
we've had many naming convention battles, right? Like so many of them. Uh, but yeah, at the end of the day, you just have to kind of like go with something. You just
Yeah.
have to decide. You have to move forward, right? Like we've made a mark. If it falls apart, so be it. We'll adjust next film. But typically, it doesn't fall apart. Typically, that's just all tied up into somebody's ego, right? Um,
Oh, for sure.
yeah, yeah.
Are you pretty good at like switching that stuff off when you leave work and go home, or are you just like? I know like as part of being a a soup or like a studio lead, I imagine like the communication just happening 24/7. Probably
Yeah.
can't like shut it off.
Yeah, I've gotten better with it. There were times where, like I would leave work feeling like, oh my God, like I came in and my pile was this high and I left and my pile is this high, right? Like you feel like you're underwater and drowning, and that really kind of gets to you. But I think, we work on these massive projects. They're massive, and nobody can do it by themselves, right?
Hmm.
And so if you take all of the weight of that on yourself, you're going to become overwhelmed. It's too much, right? And I think, you know, to me, it was learning delegation. It was learning, how to just look at that goal in front of me, instead of trying to look at the entire scope of the project, because that's really where that you end up losing sleep, right? And I think if you can manage that, you can go home and have a nice, comfortable sleep, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think one of the challenging things is delegating and then trusting that like okay, they might not do it the way you would do it, and you might not fully understand how they're doing it either, but like
yep,
just like being able to be okay with that and not having it fully mapped out in your head. Okay, I don't know exactly how this is working, but I could see that I trust the person that's doing it. And is that kind of how you look at it, or?
100%. And I think that's something that I've seen a lot of people struggle with, right? Because a lot of the supervisors got there because they're really good, right?
Yeah,
And so they get promoted, and then they think that, oh, okay, now I've got to manage everybody to be just like this, and that's when you got to pull back and be like, it's no longer about me, right? I got promoted because I was so good. Now it's about my team, right? It's about trying to grow my team, trying to give them opportunities to be able to be successful like I was, right?
that's really cool.
Yeah, give them a place to shine. And you said something that I think is crucial, which is, you know, it's not going to be the way that I would do it. They're going to make different choices. Are they wrong choices? Probably not. They're just different, right? There's a million ways you can approach a problem, and they're probably going to do it a little bit differently than I would, and that's fine, right? Like as long as the results are good, and it works, like that's totally okay. If you go down the path of trying to control that too much, you become a micromanager. And I mean, nobody likes a micromanager, right?
That sucks. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. So I think I've trained a lot of supervisors in my life, and like that's one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give to them is, trust your team. Your team is really good. Give them the leeway, right? Put guardrails around them. Make sure they're not going off the deep end, but give them the leeway to be able to push things in their own direction, to be able to experiment a little bit. 9 out of 10 times they're going to surprise you, right? If if I am managing somebody and I'm telling them push this button, push this button, push this button, do that, I'm being a micromanager, the person's going to lose objectivity. They're not going to know why they're doing the things they're doing. They're just, okay, Dave wants me to do this. I better wait until Dave comes by because I don't want to do anything outside of, and that typically happens. But if you give somebody the opportunity, chances are that they're going to excel. They're going to want to grab that brass ring, right? They're going to want to like impress. They're going to put their whole heart into it because you're giving them that opportunity. and chances are you're going to have a much better product as a result, just by, and that's free, just by simply, you know, acting like a human being. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I kind of, yeah, I've worked with a couple of people that kind of do it your way, and it's amazing. And I think we've all had those opportunities to work with some people that don't do it that way.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you're just kind of hating life and like looking for the exit kind of thing. But
Yeah.
man, you ever, especially at Disney, this happened to me a couple times, pretty much everywhere I've worked, where you're sitting in like a presentation and maybe someone on your team is like showing something they did or some new thing, and you're just like, I don't freaking understand a word they just said. Like it's just like a little bit over your head. Like, do you have you had that happen on your team where you're like, hey, this looks amazing, but can you
Yeah.
like break it down like on five, or like are you just up front with it and like, hey, I don't really understand how this works, or how do you
100%.
handle that?
100%. Like, I think to me, that's about, like, again, I go back to transparency, right? Like, I don't claim to be the know-it-all. I like to have people around me that are smarter than me, right? And so, a lot of times I think it shows a kind of vulnerability, and it makes you a little bit more human to actually ask those questions, because somebody else, if you're having a problem with it, somebody else in the room doesn't understand it either. And so if you ask the question, you're actually allowing them, because somebody, not everybody's comfortable with asking that question,
Oh
right?
yeah,
People,
for sure.
yeah, people are like, oh, I'm going to look stupid if I ask it, right? Well,
Right.
no, you look stupid if you nod your head and then go away and have no idea what happened, right? Like
Right.
that's actually stupid. But if you ask the question and you're gonna go away with a better understanding. Maybe you don't fully understand it totally, but at least you're able to absorb some of it, right? And so
Yeah.
I think you always ask the question. You always do, right? If it's not clear. I would always gauge whether a meeting was successful based off of my team's reaction. If I'm like, okay, any questions? And everybody's just quiet and like, I'm like, I screwed this meeting up, right? Like, I screwed it up because nobody's asking. I know there's plenty of questions to ask, and everybody's just nodding their head. So, to me, it's better if you're asking that, because your team's learning, you're growing, right? The more that we share, uh, the more we grow. Yeah.
Yeah, it was I think it's rough with that, the whole crickets thing when you're like on Zoom or you're on like a video meeting. And I think it's more the case with those than it is in real life that you get crickets or you get just like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. You in a room, I can read the room, right? I can look at people, I can see eye contact, I can read body language, I can do all of that stuff. But in Zoom, you have none of that, right? And yeah, it's definitely challenging. Like, I find the work from home stuff to be a little bit more challenging in that respect.
mhm.
I don't think it's, I find that the work that I do has to be more intentional. I have to go out of my way to check in with people and see how they're doing, see if they understood, right? Like, whereas, like you said, like in a meeting, I could just check. I could check and see, and like, maybe I'll grab this guy at the end of the meeting and just say, hey, what's up? Or I can swing by their office or whatever. You just In Zoom, it's a little bit more difficult. I think a lot of that, just even working with your team, like, in the office, you have coffee time, you have smoke breaks, you have, like, walking to the meeting together or just passing by somebody in the hall. Like, you have all of these interactions, and I typically find those interactions are when you solve some of your biggest problems, right?
Interesting.
Yeah, you randomly run into somebody from crowds or whatever, right? And you start talking with them about the issue that you're having. And I think that's harder to manage with remote. Yeah,
Yeah.
yep, yeah,
I mean, I love being able to live wherever you want and kind of having like, oh, if I want to go walk the dog, I could do that, obviously if you're sitting at a studio and some studios allow pets, but having that freedom is amazing. Yeah. And I'm not going to shoot myself in the foot here and be like,
No,
remotes. It's not good, but I think there's pros and cons. But yeah, I think what you're talking about, having that eye-to-eye contact, especially in a meeting. I remember feeling bad, like um, at Blizzard, a lot of people just shut off their camera,
I
so
know.
you're just seeing like a little icon, and it's just quiet, and the, I always like be like, oh, like the soups and the leads are like awesome for keeping like the energy positive and like sounding excited or happy or making jokes, but it's just like you're just looking at a camera and like there's no feedback, there's no, maybe a little joke here and there on the chat. Most of the time people try to interact, but it's not the same as like,
No, it's not. I
yeah.
that's a pet peeve of mine is the icons. It's I I remember it over Disney because I've been working remote since COVID, right?
Mhm.
And I just I've never gone back into the office since then. But at Disney, everybody was really good. Everybody was still engaged, right? Because this was you were just in the building with them, right? And now you're
Right.
working at home, so you still have that connection. But then I had my next gig was over at Wayfair, and I was in meetings, and there would just be a bunch of letter icons up on the
Yeah.
screen, and I would call them out. I would call them out. I'd be like, oh, "Okay, Bob, I see your big B there, Bob. How you doing?" Like,
Right.
and I would call them out because, to me, it's I don't know, it's tough as is on remote. I think you need that human connection. I think you do. Um, and I don't know. It's something I've struggled with. Like I'm with you, whereas like I wouldn't trade my remote for the world. Like I love it. But it's got pros and cons, and you
Yeah.
just have to figure out how do you deal with those cons. And it can be done. It's just it takes more work on your end to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was the Wonder Dynamics stuff. So you worked with Wonder Dynamics for a while, and I don't know too much about it. I just remember seeing the first demo of it a while back, where you just basically, if not even anybody's not seen it, you can take a live video, like a feed, and just replace somebody with a CG character, and
Yep.
it'll take that person's motion and use that almost like a video mocap and
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
it'll mask them out of the scene. And yeah, that's pretty nuts. So like, how'd you get hooked up with them, and like what was that whole like what was it like transitioning from Disney and things like that to like this new like tech startup?
I mean, it was definitely different, right? Like I think there's a lot of difference between tech companies and movie studios, just the way that they're structured, right? And so
Sure.
my first experience with that was with Wayfair, but then Wonder Dynamics was also another tech company. So just the structure, just the way that they approach problems is different, right? Whereas studios will have more of a hierarchy from the top down, and you get information fed to you that way. Tech companies are like these little bubbles. You got a team over here, a team over here, a team over here, a team over here, and they're all trying to solve some problem. Um, the the pros and cons, the hierarchy, communication is super strong, right? Because you've got all these mechanisms to push communication down to the floor. Whereas, but the problem with the hierarchy structure is it's hard for anybody at the bottom to be able to innovate and push back up, right?
Right.
So tech companies have solved this by creating these little modular units. And so you'll have people, they're empowered to solve this problem. Here, make a group. You're going to solve this problem. Here, make a group. You're going to solve. And now you have these little bubbles, and it's a very flat hierarchy. The problem that I found is that communication suffers. So like I would call it the match game, right? Like I'd be talking to people from different departments, and I hear somebody's working on this thing, and I just talked to somebody a week ago, and they're working on the same thing in a different unit. But these two have never actually talked to each other, right?
They're
So
not aware of each other.
yeah, so they're both solving the same problem. So there's a lot of redundancy. There's a lot of communication isn't the greatest. And I hear that from a lot of my friends that work in tech industry as well. But that was just an observation. I think when it comes to AI, now AI is, even though it's two letters, it's become a bit of a four-letter word in our industry, right?
Oh,
Like,
totally. Yeah.
yeah, I think, if we look at AI now, I get it. I get it, right? But I think there are different places that do it well. And then there's a lot of flashy stuff out there, right? Like generative AI is very flashy. Looks great. Looks beautiful. But you can't control it. You can't art direct it. You can't do anything with it, right? Um, Adobe, I think they're onto something, right? Where they're looking at AI as a tool, like that. I'm working on this image, and AI is just another tool that I can use to
Right.
fill in part of that image. And I think if you put it in the artist's control, you're going to have a lot of power there, right? You know, where it stands today, that will be great for YouTubers, right? The people that don't care about the content that that like not to say that they don't care, but like they're not looking for like primo high end content. They just want
Right.
something to fill in their channel and make some more content. That will be fine for them. Generate something and give it to me, and that's what it is. But in the film industry, nah, man, nah. I'm modifying the shadow color underneath that car, right? Like I need like
Yeah.
everything gets art directed to the nth degree. So you need controls, and if you look at it compared to where it was, where CG was back in the early 90s, it was all prompt based. It was all right. It's the same thing until people made a suite of tools around it, until they made an interface, until then artists could start interacting with it. And then boom, right? Like that industry, you went from TIE fighters floating around in space to like dragons, right? Like it's you have real artists controlling this stuff. And so excuse me. To me, one of the appealing things with Wonder Dynamics was that yes, the one button solution was I upload a video, I upload my character, and then it will swap out the actor with the character and composite it all in the final frame. That's the one button solution. But it also gave you the option to download the USD file, to
That's
download the
cool.
cleaned up backplates, to download all of the pieces that made up that scene. And that's where the power comes in, right? So in this case, you're using AI not to generate, not generative, like it's not creating something. It gave you the motion and all of the components you need. And now you can have an artist go in there and fine tune it. You can have them really sweeten it. So it gets you to an endpoint quicker. Like I said, some people, they're fine with that one button solution. Some people are good with that. But, there's a lot of power in getting all of the components back. And now, I basically just got shortcutted to my final goal. Like I said before, every time we have this automation, it doesn't cut down the length of time it makes to make a movie. It just means the quality goes up, the scope goes up, right? And so if I can get there quicker, that means I'm concentrating more on the art, less on the technical components, right? And I think that's what was appealing to me about it. It wasn't it still gave artists the control to be
Right.
able to tweak out what they want, right? And I think I don't know. I see a lot of I mean, I know it's a hot topic right now, but I think it's like anything. Even CG was that way, right? I remember even clip art, like back in the early
Oh,
90s, clip art was going to get rid of all the artists, right? Like it was, oh, no, no, no. Now everybody can put clip art in their PowerPoints, but if you want something real, you're still going to
that
hire
looks
an artist.
good.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
still a huge difference. So if you look at the content being generated today, wait till an artist gets their hands on it. You know what I mean? Like wait until we see where that can really go. If that's the equivalent of clip art back in the 90s. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah, my father-in-law was is a graphic designer, and but he was like he had a lot of this. He was doing marker comps in like the 80s, 90s, and then got into to digital art. And then he was telling me that like yeah, like when like digital art became like more accessible, then like a lot of these companies or businesses would be like, oh, like my secretary could just learn like Microsoft Word and make a logo and do my ad for me or whatever. But like then everybody was kind of cranking out this really crappy stuff, and it's like I think it's the same thing where people are like, oh, I went on to the
Yeah.
thing and I typed in some stuff and I made my own animated short or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you
But
know,
it will even out. It always does, right? It
yeah,
always does. I think the trick is just to, we're in this place where we're constantly evolving, right? Like, I mean, I was around at the time when 2D was on its way out over at Disney, right? And
I remember
and
that.
yep, and 3D was is coming in, and there was a lot of there was a, it wasn't a great time over there, right? Like there was a lot of people that were very upset with 3D, and at the time, justifiably so. Like it was in its infancy, and 2D was in its heyday, right? Like so,
Yeah,
like you have these pros that have worked all their life to get up to this level, and they're doing beautiful work. 3D isn't even close. Like everything was stiff and robotic, like at the time, right?
yeah.
Like it's, but I think those like there was a lot of people that said screw you 3D, and that like we even had people that were destroying, like beating up their computers with baseball bats and destroying them behind the building, like it was it was not welcome. But you had those others that were like, okay, let me see where I can fit in here, and I think you know like Alex Cooper Schmidt, I can bring him up as an example. He was a supervising animator on for Stitch, incredible artist. But he was a 2D guy, and so Alex was instrumental. I brought him onto the Tech Anim team as a visual supervisor, right? Like to give notes and everything, because there's so much knowledge to be had from 2D is an art form that's been going on what 100 years, right?
Yeah,
It's it's incredibly robust in the knowledge base there, right? And CG, as I said, is still in its infancy. And if you can mix those two together, right? Like all of us 3D animators at the time, like we're like, oh my god, it's moving, yay! Like everything's great. But like the 2D animators are like, well, the cuff isn't pulling, like the arms are moving a little weird. They should be more fluid, and they were able to bring this stuff in. Glenn Keane did it on Rapunzel, you know, and it's night and day, right? To me, Rapunzel was really, one of those movies where it was like, wow, like that really felt like 90s animation, and that's credited to Glenn, right, for bringing all of that to there. But like Alex was bringing this to the tech anim department. He was helping with like how hair should move, right? Like it doesn't just you don't just blow wind in it and call it a day, right? Like there's an art to it, right? The overlap, everything. So I think blending that, and don't lose that knowledge, right? And keep growing it. We're all in a place right now where technology changes so quick that
super quick.
we have to be constantly in this place of learning. Otherwise, we're just going to get run over. We're going to get left behind. But yeah, you have to embrace it. I don't. To me, I get it. I understand the AI thing, and I get it. But I think if artists embrace it, and if artists learn how to control it, you're going to have an incredible product. Like think of it as an assistant, as opposed to somebody that's taking your job, right? You know,
Yeah, that's really cool.
yeah.
Is there anything you're doing personally, like with AI, or any experimentation that, like, maybe you recommend someone checking out, or hey, I'm using this thing to help me? Is there anything specific that?
I mean, not really. I mean, I don't really like. I've played around a lot with like the Nerf stuff, which is great. I've played around with some generative AI stuff, but like most of that stuff is just it's more like a showroom floor, right? Like it's look at this flashy thing that I created. That's great, but I can't practically use that anywhere. Like it's very flashy and it's very pretty, but I
Right.
can't use it practically. I have used some Mid Journey to
Hmm.
help me with like concepts and things like
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah. I've done the
Um,
same.
yeah, so I think stuff like that, but I don't know. I yes, it's moving quick. It's moving really, really quick, and it's still in its infancy, right? It still can't. We don't have the control. It's not stable enough, right? They're making strides. Like turntables of characters is actually a very difficult thing in AI because it can't remember what it looked like, right? And so as it rotates around, it looks different. um, but yeah, it will get there. It's just right now it's more a bit of a spectacle, I think.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, uh,
Yeah, the powers that be in different companies might see a cool demo somewhere and they're like, "That's it. We're gonna strip out 80% of this, and we're gonna implement and
yeah,
it's
yeah.
something like that.
It's interesting though. Like I think, I think they would do well for hiring artists. Um, you know, like even look at the video game industry. Look at the way the video games looked prior to the industry turning towards the film industry to start pulling people on, right? Like you went from this place where it was like dark forces or like everything was just like a repeating texture and
Right.
to suddenly like today's games are like cinematic, right? They're and I think they did a great thing by bringing in artists that were like maybe you're not game designers, but you have a lot to offer.
Yeah.
And it really pushed the look. I think AI companies would really do themselves a service by bringing on artists, art directors, to really try and help figure that out, right? Because that's where the rubber hits the road, right? Like that's your stopping point right there. Like
Yeah.
art direction. So they need to figure that out, but a lot of them are like, well, I just need it to be stable. I just look at the pretty images, right? But it's not going to be truly powerful until you go there, you know.
Right on.
Yeah.
Cool. I gotta ask you, man. You got your Iron Maiden shirt. Like, has your taste in music changed at all over the years, or is it still
I
old school metal and that's where it's
I
at?
still love Maiden. I mean, I haven't been to a like I think this is the Legacy of the Beast.
Uh,
Um, so it was pre-COVID. But I still love Maiden. I still love metal. I got a pretty open palette. I like a lot of blues, a lot of rock and roll, a lot of yeah. But my heart my heart belongs to Maiden. Belongs to Eddie.
that's awesome, man. Yeah. So I was talking with somebody the other day, and the software program Poser came up,
Oh,
right?
I forgot
And it
about
made
that.
me think of that one album cover that we used to joke about.
Oh my God, yeah,
I
dances with
gotta, yeah. Let me bring this up, man, because this. I don't know if I'll find it quick enough. I'm not Mr. Speedy. Oh yeah, here it is. Uh, share my screen. Hang on a second. Let's see.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah,
Zoom
so
on
this
that
thing,
baby.
man, was like, yeah, I don't know. This is like a crappy image of it, but like, yeah, like this. There's this like shoulder thing happening right here, and like,
Yeah.
I think we used to joke like, they just like got a copy, or like some like one of their buddies got a copy of Poser or something, and was like, dude, I can make you an album cover, and
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, that rocks, man.
I think it's funny because that's topical, right? Because it does go back to what we were just talking about, right? Like when
Yeah,
Poster came out, anybody could do that. Anybody, but here's your result, buddy.
Is
Like,
it good?
yeah, maybe you should get an artist to do that, right? Like,
Yeah, like Bruce Dickinson was like, "Oh, I made the album cover myself," and everyone's like, "Oh, let's check it out." Oh,
uh,
it's great. Yeah, that
yeah,
works.
that's great, Bruce. We love it, man.
It's like
Yeah,
the George Lucas effect, right? With like
yeah,
the
yeah.
Jar Jar
Jar
Binks
Jar's
stuff. Yeah.
awesome. George. Yeah, no, it's true though. It's yeah, it's boy, that is yeah, because it's Derek Riggs, man. Derek Riggs was the guy that did all of, like, in the '80s. I would sit there and look at like that Power Slave cover, like, oh, like trying to find all the cool little things he added in there.
Yeah.
But like he's an amazing artist, right? And then you have that thing. It's like,
Yeah.
hi.
No. Did he
And
do the Somewhere in Time cover?
yep, that was
Dude,
him.
that one was badass, man. It's
Yeah,
like all the street and the little stores and like I think the names of the shops have like little
yeah.
references to different things.
Yeah, there's all kinds of little hidden things in his stuff. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, yeah. As a kid, like it's interesting, right? Because like that was a whole part of my childhood and yours too. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Uh, just looking at those album covers, right? And like
And then
thing
like
that,
sitting in school and drawing that, like trying to draw it
yeah,
on your like book or something, like your book cover, and just like
100%, 100%. I would, because I was the artist, right? Like in my
uh
school, and so I would be like the guy that like everybody, dude, hook up my denim jacket, man. I want Black Sabbath on my denim jacket, and so of course, like, I did all that stuff just because it was fun, right? But yeah, no, all
yeah.
of, but like that's a thing that doesn't exist today, right? Like for kids, like they don't, like the album covers don't really mean
I don't
anything.
think so. I
You
don't. I'm not too in touch with like I don't know. A lot of the some of our kids are like into hip hop and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I'm like, oh,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah. Well, there's that.
yeah. There's that part, but yeah, I don't think they're into album art and all that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just a little bit different.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know. I wore out so many tapes, like, because it was my God, I've been through records, 8 tracks, cassette tapes, CDs, digital, right? But the cassettes were probably around for the longest, and like I don't know how many copies of like Metallica Ride the Lightning I bought,
Oh
right?
man,
Just because like after a while, the tape
it
deck would
gets
just eat
eaten
them.
up. Yeah,
Yeah. Or you'd leave them over at somebody's house, right? Like,
right.
and so I ended up buying that album so many times,
That's a
but
badass album, man.
it's a great album. Great album.
Yeah. Have you listened to any of the new Metallica stuff?
I kind of lost my taste for them after, like, I mean, it's probably around the Black album. Like, it was probably
Yeah.
like, yeah, like, I think they just went a different direction. I think, I, I liked the older stuff. It was a little bit more raw. It was a little bit more like, you
Yeah,
know,
thrashy,
yeah,
technical, thrashy stuff.
yeah.
Really
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. But I tried. I try it every once in a while, but like a lot of it's like, it's kind of lame covers. It's just I don't know. It ain't my
Yeah, the
thing.
cover's not there, right? It's like the cover has to be awesome. And then
Yeah, yeah. I
like I
know.
remember going to the CD store and just like going through like the worst was when you saw something that looked awesome and then you put it in and it was like, what is this crap, man? Like what I thought Meatloaf was a metal band. Like what happened?
I know. Look. He's
Look
got
at the
like a
cover.
motorcycle in hell.
Yeah, like yeah. That was a rude awakening for me.
It's funny because like there's not a lot of bands that have made it through time. Like I think that's why I have a lot of respect for Maiden, because like they've always been Maiden. Like they've never changed, right? Like
Right.
Priest went through a weird swing, right? Like all these bands from back then, Metallica went through a weird thing in my book.
They're still in
Um,
it.
but these guys have always been Maiden. Like they've never lost sight of who they are, and I think that's why I kind of stuck with them. But yeah, my personal tastes.
Right on. Are you have you been like into any TV series or shows or anything that like catches your eye? Or like I mentioned, Game of Thrones is like for me, I used to love just watching that just for like the visuals were
Yeah,
badass. That's
yeah,
fine on top of everything else, but
yeah. I the Boys has been fun.
oh yeah,
Uh,
I haven't
the,
watched the newest one.
nah, yeah, the newest one gets a little weird, but like the end was a really good ending, so I highly recommend watching the season.
Uh,
Um, the end. the last episode in particular was freaking amazing. Um, uh, I started watching House of Dragons, and I finished the second season, and it's getting a little better, but it doesn't have, in my mind, it doesn't have the secret sauce that Game of Thrones had.
No.
It it's a little lackluster in the character side of things. Like whereas like you had all of these great characters. Like I just wanted to see more of like Littlefinger or I it
Yeah.
just these great characters that were just just drop them anywhere, throw them in a white room, and you're gonna enjoy yourself, right? Like
Yeah.
everybody in House of Dragons to me is just a little monotone, and they're
Kind of
like,
stale.
yeah, and it's like, oh, you guys like dragons, right? Here's more dragons, right? Like, and
Not enough. It's pretty cool though.
yeah, but I don't think that's what sold. Like, that's
Right.
not what got me hooked on Game of Thrones, right? It was the character development and like just even the politics of the castle, right? Like it
Right.
was, yeah, I
I
don't know,
always like watching the Hound, like when he walked into that bar, like and
yeah.
like he's like, I just want to eat my freaking chickens, and like the guy like sits down in front of him, and like by the end he's like killing them all and stuff. But yeah,
Such good writing, man. Like Jamie Lannister is another one because like you started out the show like I hate this asshole. Like he tried to kill the kid, and like this guy's a freaking
yeah,
scum.
the
And then
psychopath.
yeah, but a couple like seasons into it, you're rooting for him, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty good, guys. Like that's pretty good. Like you got me to root for this guy, like who's a complete asshole, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't know. To me, that's really good writing. It's just yeah.
Did you ever
They're
get into the books? Are you a book guy? I forgot.
yeah. I read the books. Yeah, they're a little bit different, right? Like, but they never finished.
Uh,
But like, what was there was oh my god, Ned's wife. She became yeah. I don't want to ruin that for anybody, but like, there's a different arc completely in the books that the
oh really?
TV never. Yeah, the TV.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't read it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that goes in a completely different direction. But it's funny because like a lot of it a lot of it started out almost 1-1 to the books. Like season 1 is almost 100% to the books. Season 2 is really close, but it starts diverging, and then by the time you get up to season 5, it's just like they're making up stuff, right? Like because there was no content, and you can kind of feel it, right? Like by the time season 8, like I remember there was like Jamie Lannister almost died, right? Like, and he fell into, or was it him or was it Braun? I can't remember. No, I
He
think it was.
fell into the water, right? Because
Yeah,
the dragon was like, you know.
yeah. I'm like, that shit doesn't happen in Game of Thrones. Like nobody just narrowly escapes death. It's like you
Like
either
they
die,
die.
yeah, like that's it, right? Like there's no narrow escapes. And I was like, oh, this they ran out of material, right? Like they don't, it's funny that way, but you can actually feel it. Where George R. Martin stuff ran out and where they kind of picked it up,
Yeah, when they started filling the gaps. That
Yeah.
reminds me, I was talking to somebody the other day about the show Lost. Remember?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That yeah. Whatever happened to the smoke monster? Like there were so many things in there. Like what happened to that? Like
Yeah, I need answers, man. Like, why did it
I,
have cash register noises in it? Like, what?
man, there was another show on HBO. The same guys did it, called The Leftovers. I think it was called The Leftovers. Yeah, I think it was
I don't
called
think I
that.
saw that.
It was basically like 2% of the Earth's population just disappears.
Oh, I think I remember seeing that. Yeah, like like biblical stuff, kind of
Yeah,
almost, right? Yeah.
yeah, and then it's same thing. They set up like this intriguing world, and you're like, oh my god, what's going to happen next? What's going
Yeah,
on?
I'm
What's this thing?
invested.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no payoff whatsoever. They ended the series, and it's like it's the same thing as Lost. It's like, man, you guys suck. I want my money back. I want my time back.
Yeah, it was fun though. It was fun though watching those things. I remember like yeah, going on break and like, oh, did you see it last week? And like
Yeah,
try to figure out like what's going
yeah,
on there.
yeah. There's so many of those now, but I mean, there's a lot of good stuff out there. There's a lot of garbage out there too, right? Like you got to
Right.
kind of like, pick and choose. I usually wait like I wait like a good few seasons before I start watching something because
Right.
yeah, like I have to wait until somebody tells me, like it's overwhelming. Like that's how I started Breaking Bad. I started Breaking Bad on like season 5, because it didn't appeal to me.
Yeah,
And
that first episode was just kind of so off the wall. You're like, what? I
yeah,
don't know. Yeah.
doesn't feel great, right? Yeah, but like so many people just were like talking it up, that I finally, and I love the show. I actually think I'm behind on it, but Better Call Saul is actually even better.
Is
I
it?
think. Yeah, the writing is much better. Like they it's weird because I didn't like that character in Breaking Bad, but like the way that they integrate the characters and the backstory and it just they could go to paths. It could feel very campy and like cameos showing up,
Right.
but they didn't do that. They did it in a very natural way where these were just characters in this universe, and and it all tied together really well. So I thought that they did a really good job with that. But yeah, yeah, it's the good writing I think is the key, right? And they're few and far between.
Yeah, it always comes back to that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Right
Man.
on. Well, Dave, thanks for being on the show, man. I won't keep you forever, but that's been awesome, dude. Awesome catching up.
Yeah, for sure, man. It's always great catching up with you, Jeff.
Awesome, dude.
Cool.